Hi, thanks so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Jessie Peterson. I'm the Director of Education here at SunRay Construction Solutions. SunRay secures $10 billion annually for GCs, subs, and suppliers. We are a national construction document service. Today's webinar is conducted by the wonderful Alex Barthet, a Florida construction lien law expert. Today's webinar topic is Don't Sign That Release Unless It Says This. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the fabulous and incredible Alex Barthet.
Thanks, Jesse. My name is Alex Barthet. I am a board certified construction attorney here in Florida. And today we're going to talk about what should be in your releases. We're going to go through them in great detail so you understand why it's so important that your release says certain things. So let's get started. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can use the GoToWebinar chat box, which should be on your screen. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation. We will answer them all at the end. And do not include the names of any people or companies in your questions. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about releases and the various forms that they come in. We're going to walk through a few of them so you understand how they work. We're going to talk about the one thing that you need to do in every release. We're going to also talk about conditional releases because that comes up quite a bit. We'll answer your questions and we'll talk about some free tools that are available to you to make sure that you get the most out of this webinar. Okay, so let's talk about releases. So the first thing you need to understand is that not every release is the same. Depending on whether you're the owner, the GC, the sub, or the sub-sub, that release is going to look different. And it looks different for a reason. So as a subcontractor, you want to give someone a very narrow release, giving away the fewest rights as possible when someone is giving you a check, right? So if I'm a subcontractor, if I'm a painter and I'm showing up to pick up a check, I'd like to give away the fewest amount of rights as possible in exchange for that check. Now, the shoe is on the other foot. When it comes to being a GC, you want to get a very broad release when you give someone a check. So if we turn around that transaction I just told you, right? If I'm the GC and I'm handing the painter a check, I want to know that when I give that painter a check, that painter is releasing every possible claim that they could have through the period of time that I'm paying them, so that they can't come back later for change orders, claims, additional overhead, delay damages. So again, when you're giving someone a check and you're getting a release, you want that release to be as broad as possible, but the opposite is always true. When you're giving someone a release and getting a check, you want to give away the fewest rights as possible. So let's start by looking at the Florida statutory release forms, which are found in Chapter 713 of Florida statutes. These are kind of the baseline releases that most people talk about and we see quite frequently. Okay, so this release that's on your screen is the waiver and release of lien upon progress payment that's found in Chapter 713.20. So the lien statute, which defines how you have lien rights, how the lien law works, it also includes form releases. So if we look at this release form, you'll notice that it has a blank for the amount of money that you are expecting to get if you are the one that is getting a check and giving a release. It also has a through date, the date through which you are giving up your lien rights. Now, what's important to understand about the statutory lien waivers is that the only right that you're giving up is your lien right. You have a bundle of rights. You have your contract rights, you have rights for change orders, for delays, and you also have lien rights. When you sign a statutory lien release, you are only giving up your lien rights. The other rights that you have, such as your contract rights to get paid, are not being released when you sign a statutory lien release. Also remember, that's true when you get a statutory lien release. If you pay someone a check and they give you a statutory lien release, the only rights that they're giving up are their statutory lien rights. Okay, so let's take a look at another release. So this is the statutory waiver and release of lien upon final payment. You'll notice that it has a blank for the amount of money that you are expecting to receive if you are giving someone this release and getting a check. But you'll also notice that it has no through date. So remember, the progress release has a through date in the body of the document. The final release does not. And the reason that it does not is that it is effective on the day you sign it. So just know that if it doesn't have a through date, it's effective on the day you sign it. Interesting tidbit, you'll notice that there's no notary section on the statutory release forms. It is not legally required to notarize a release, a progress or a final release. Now, everyone is going to expect you to notarize it. People will reject your release if it is not notarized. All of the forms that are ever handed to you will have a notary section on it. It's never worth arguing with someone that, well, the statute doesn't require it. But it is something for you to know that legally you do not need to notarize the release for it to be legally effective. Okay, so let's take a look at another release. Now, the first thing you'll notice about this release is that there's a lot more words on the page. The more words that are on a release, you should assume the more rights you're giving away. So let's break down this release so you understand its component parts. So the first thing you'll see is that it doesn't have a blank for the amount of money. It has a $10 in it. And we'll talk about that $10 in a minute. Look at all of the rights that are being given away. So this is a release of not only your right to claim a lien, but it's also for any claims, change orders, works, materials, delays, fees, costs, losses, expenses, damages, or sums for the labor, services, or materials furnished. So you are, by signing this release, you are giving up pretty much all of your rights that you have to be paid. Now, this release also has a through date, and that through date, again, is the effective date that this release is through. You'll notice again that there's a lot of words on this page. It also has some additional representations and warranties that it wants you to make. So this one says that the undersigned warrants and represents that it has paid all of its bills, right? So not only are you saying in exchange for an amount of money, I'm giving up my rights through this date, you're also verifying that you have paid all your bills. It also says that all work and materials supplied by or through you fully comply with the applicable contract documents, right? So notice that when you actually read releases that have lots of words on them, you're probably giving up more than just your lien rights, and you're probably making affirmative representations that you've paid your bills, that you're going to indemnify people to the extent you haven't paid your bills, that you've done all the work consistent with the plans and specifications. So just know that those things are things that you are affirming when you sign releases that have all of this language in it. So the first question I get all the time is, well, okay, Alex, you showed me lots of forms. Which one do I have to use? And the short answer to that question is, well, what does your contract say? What did you agree with your counterparty that your release is going to say? So if you agree to a form of release in your contract, that's what you're going to be bound to. So for example, if you look at the contract that you've signed, it probably says in exchange for payments every month and final payment at the end of the job, you're going to sign the releases that are found in Exhibit G attached to this contract. Well, then you gotta flip to that, and then when you look at it, well, that's the release you now have agreed to sign every month. If you also sign a contract that says that you're going to provide a release form that is acceptable to the GC or to the owner, well, guess what? You're also agreeing that that release form can be provided to you later. So you don't want to find yourself in that position later. So when you're getting your contract and you're reviewing it, you need to negotiate not only the terms of the contract, but the exhibits. So you need to negotiate the form of the release. So as a subcontractor, I would recommend that you add language to your contract that says something like, the parties agree that Chapter 713.20 forms of release shall be used for all partial and final release forms. They will be conditioned upon payment, and subcontractor may include exceptions in the release. So if you added something like this to your contract, it now gives you a contract right to say, hey, we agreed that we're going to use the statutory forms. That's the first part. We agreed that I can make each release conditioned on actually being paid. That's important. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And we've agreed that I can include exceptions in the release. Let me take a minute and talk about exceptions. So the exceptions in the release are, what if you have to sign a release through the end of October, but you have unexecuted change orders that haven't matured, haven't been signed and put into the contract? What if you have a claim that you've submitted for $10,000 of extended general conditions? Well, if you sign that broad release that I showed you, and you don't exclude from the release those claims through that period, then you are releasing them. I want to repeat myself. If you sign a broad form release through a date certain and you have prior claims, you are releasing all of those claims from your future right to collect them. So having the right to include exceptions in your release is important. Okay, so what is the one thing that you absolutely need to make sure that you do with every release? Is you need to make sure that you match the through date with the dollars that you are receiving. Okay, so the through date is the effective date of the release. I showed you certain examples of that through date. Here is where everyone makes the mistake. The through date will control over the payment amount. Let me say that again. The through date will control over the payment amount. So let me give you a very specific example. Let's assume that you submit a pay request for $10,000 for the work through the end of October. So you're expecting a check such that in exchange for $10,000, you're releasing your rights through the end of October. You show up to pick up your check and they tell you, well, we're not paying you $10,000, we're only paying you $6,000 through the end of the month. So the amount of money that you're getting has gone down, but the through date has stayed the same. Many people incorrectly perceive or believe that, well, I submitted a pay request for 10, they're paying me 6, so that 4 is just going to carry over. That is incorrect. If you are accepting a $6,000 check that gets you through the end of the month, if we go to court, the judge is going to say you understood that by signing this release that $6,000 was enough to release all of your rights through the end of the month. So don't come back to me, the judge, and say, well, no, I actually needed 10,000, not 6,000. The judge is going to look at you and say, well, then why did you sign a release that gave away your rights through the end of the month for only $6,000? So you need to make sure that you match the through date to the dollar. So let's continue with my example. So you show up and they only have a $6,000 check for you. You need now to change the through date of the release. So, okay, you're only paying me to 6,000 instead of 10,000. Well, that only represents work through October 7th, October 21st. You have to figure out the date that $6,000 represents, but that's the only thing that you can release through. That's the only date you can release through because you've only been paid a portion of all of the work you did through the entire month. So as I said, you have to make the two of them match. Let me take a moment and at least explain the significance of $10. So let's go back to my example where you're showing up to pick up a $10,000 check and they only give you $6,000. If you are giving someone a check and you are getting a release, you want that release to say $10. And the reason you want it to say $10 is because legally speaking, $10, even if I'm handing you $6,000 or $10,000, a court just says, well, you got some value for this release. So the $10 is a placeholder for some value. And if we went to court and you said, well, I was expecting 10, they only gave me 6, and the release says $10, I would argue on the other side, and the judge would likely agree, well, you said 10 and you showed up and you got a check for 6,000. Well, 6,000 is more than 10. You know, don't tell me that you were expecting 10 because it doesn't say that anywhere in the document. So if you are giving people money and getting releases, you would like those releases to always be $10 so we don't even have to argue about whether or not they got enough money to satisfy the condition of the release. The converse is also true. If you are giving people releases and picking up checks, you want to make sure that the release has the amount of money that you are expecting. So if you're expecting a $10,000 check, you want that release to say in exchange for $10,000, not $10, which leads us into our next point, which is making releases conditioned on actually receiving the payment. So a conditional release is expressly conditioned on payment. That is when you get the money in your bank. So here's an example that you can type in, you can handwrite right into your releases. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary, this waiver and release is conditioned upon and not effective until the undersigned receives paid funds of blank. So if you're expecting a $10,000 check, you're going to write $10,000 in that blank. Be very careful for releases that are titled conditional. So the title of the release is conditional partial release of lien, but it has no conditional language in it. That's not a conditional release. It has to have language that expressly makes the release conditioned on you receiving a specific amount of money. And back to our $10, you can never have a release that's conditioned on $10. A $10 conditional release is conditioned on you getting $10. And I'm assuming that you're giving releases in exchange for a lot more than $10. Now, as far as our tools, if you use SunRay, which all of you should, you can pick conditional waivers when you are closing out your projects or getting releases produced through SunRay through their release system. So just know that those conditional releases are already in the forms available to you on SunRay. We also have a stamp. It's called the makemeconditionalstamp.com. If you go to makemeconditionalstamp.com, you will see a little video and a section where we will send you this stamp for free. And what it is that language that I just showed you, it's now in a stamp. So if you print out any release, you can get that stamp, you can stamp it right on the release. It'll have a little blank, you write in the $10,000 you're expecting, and this makes any release conditional. We've given out many hundreds of these stamps at this point. And if you have any doubt that a release is conditional, if you stamp it and you write in the amount you're expecting, it will definitely make it conditional. So if there's any doubt, if you use the stamp, it will turn any release into a conditional release. So go to makemeconditionalstamp.com to get your own. So with that, Jesse, do we have any questions?
Well, first of all, Alex, thank you so much. That was really great. There was some really great information there. We do have a couple of questions that came through, pardon me, and this kind of plays off of the last little bit that you were talking about. It says, if I'm a supplier, is there any upside to signing the release that says $10?
So the question about whether you should sign a release that says $10 is, are you getting the right amount of money that you're expecting for that period of time. So, you know, if you're expecting 10,000 and there's a $10,000 check ready for you and the release says $10, that's okay. Again, you want to still make sure that it's conditional, right? If you're giving someone your release before you're getting the money, you always want to make that release conditioned on you actually receiving the funds or the money, so that you're not giving someone a release and if you don't get the money, you want to know that that release is no good. That's the significance of it being conditional. But as far as
Right.
$10 goes, again, if you're getting the right amount of money, it probably isn't that big of a deal.
Okay. And this one I kind of plays into the same thing. It says if the GC that hired me doesn't want the true amount paid on the release for the owner to see what the GC is paying me, what amount would I leave then? Would it be blank?
Right. So that is a reason why some people use $10 releases, right? Is I'm a GC, I have a fixed price contract with my owner. I don't want the owner to get these releases and look and count up all of the amounts that I've paid out and say, wait a second, I think you're charging me a lot more money, right? So they want to have the amounts that they want to have the payments to vendors and subs be a black box, and the way they do that is $10. So if you're exchanging money immediately for your release, right? So if you're showing up and they're giving you your payment and you're giving them a release, the fact that it says $10 is fine, again, assuming that you are getting the right amount of money. If you have to do it like a month in advance, or you have to send them your release before you get your funds, then what I would suggest is the following. You would say, look, I can't give you a $10 release until I get the money. So I'm going to give you a release that says it's in exchange for $10,000. When I get the check and the funds clear, then I will give you the exact same release, but it will say $10. So until I get the money, I need a release that clearly delineates the amount of money that I'm expecting to get. But after that, if you want me to sign the same release and just say $10 so you can give that to somebody else, I can do that. So that's the way we would recommend you handle that, right? So sign a release for the right amount of money, get the money, and then sign the same release for $10 for the GC to do whatever he wants.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Another question that came through, should I get a letter from an attorney about the notarization not being needed?
No, no one will believe you. They don't care if you have a letter from a lawyer. They will just say, if you want your money, I need you to notarize it. So
All right.
I bring it up so everyone knows. It comes up every once in a while. It is not worth having the argument.
All right, wonderful. And then another question that came through, as a subcontractor, can I apply the conditional stamp to the contractor's lien form?
Absolutely. That's the purpose of the stamp, is that people are going to give you release forms and you want to make them conditional, and you do it so often, you just stamp it and it becomes a conditional release automatically, because now you've added that term, which again, you can handwrite if you wanted, but it's just a lot easier to have it as a stamp. So that's why the make me conditional stamp is effective.
All right, wonderful. I do think that that's the last of the questions that's come through so far. If somebody does think of a question that wasn't addressed, please feel free to reach out and we will be sure to answer any questions for you. Can you go to the next slide for us, please? All right, so who's ready to win a gift? We're testing your knowledge. If you can answer these questions correctly, go ahead and answer it in the chat. I'll send you over a little prize, a little gift from us. Here are the questions. So I know Alex has gone over this so many times before. So have we at SunRay. What is the NTO deadline in Florida? And then what is the lien deadline in Florida? So if you think you know those answers, go ahead and write them in the chat and I'll send you guys out a little gift. All right, can you go to the next slide for me? All right, so here are some of SunRay's resources to help you stay organized, know your deadlines, and secure your lien rights. Go ahead, scan that QR code to access these incredible resources. There's so much information for you available on our site. There's free project information sheets that help you stay organized right from the get-go on your projects and remind you to ask the right questions of who are you actually working for? What's your role in this? Are there notice of commencements? Is this a bonded project? There's so much in there that will just help you kind of remember everything to ask. And then the next slide for me, please. All right, so our next webinar with Alex is going to be, I recorded my lien, how do I get paid? That's going to be on December 12th at 9 a.m. So please go ahead and register for free at sunraynotice.com/education. All right, if you guys don't mind, give us a quick review on Google. It takes about a minute of your time, but it helps us get some of the feedback that we need for our webinars and see what we can do to make them even more insightful and informational for you. All right, and then wonderful. That is all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much to everybody that attended. We hope to see you guys at our next webinar. Alex, thank you again for everything. We appreciate you. I hope everyone has a beautiful and sunny day. Thanks, everyone.